We're introducing the concept of outcome-based assessment today. And what we're looking at is how this new form of assessment will be different from a more traditional sense of assessment in a math classroom. So, more what we're used to compared to how we might change things in order to hopefully have our students be more successful in this new D-Stream Grade 9 course that we're introducing next year. This is going to take us a little bit of time to get through all of the ins and outs of outcome-based assessment. There's quite a bit there. So we're going to have a few different videos to hopefully walk you through it. The intent of this first part is just to give you a quick glimpse into what we're talking about. What is outcome-based assessment in the first place? And how does it differ from our traditional assessment practices? And that's what we're looking at here. So this would be what I think would be fair to say is a fairly standard assessment practice in our math classes. We have a curriculum document and we're assessing it through a variety of different assessments throughout the year. And those are, I mean, in a math class, traditionally we're looking at math, tests and quizzes and projects. And when we do each of those new assessments, we're going to enter a new entry into our mark book, right? Every time we do something new, a new entry appears in mark book and we adjust the weightings and so on. But every time something new happens, new entry. The other thing to notice here is every time we do one of those entries, Kika has to kick in, right? We have to make sure that we're balancing our four assessment categories as well. That's what things would normally look like. Now, what I want you to think about next is this idea that maybe we could change that. Maybe instead of having our assessment be based on things that students did and the results of those assessments, what if we frame it around things that we want students to know? And that's the idea behind outcome based. Before the course even starts, we're going to think about what the big ideas for the course are. What are the things that we really want the students to know by the time they finish the course? And those are called outcomes. So we're going to have a series of outcomes in the course, many of them, right? And as students do new things and demonstrate their learning more, we update these outcomes. So what I want you to imagine is your mark book, instead of having new entries every time we do a new assessment, your mark book is fixed. However many outcomes you have, that's the number of entries that you have in your mark book. And every time you do a new assessment, rather than just adding a new entry, we update. So each of these outcomes is fluid throughout the year as students demonstrate an improved understanding of each outcome, of each big idea. We'll go into our mark book and we'll update it. That's the idea. So each of these outcomes already there from the beginning, we know what they are, and we update them as we go. Now, when we get to part two, our second video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifically how the assessments might work and how we'll break that down and actually put it into Markbook. So that's all coming. Again, what we want to talk about today is just this very basic idea. What is outcome based in the first place? So to get started, we need to think about what these big ideas are. And in a perfect world, and I do mean that in a perfect world, where we're trying to create these outcomes that are the big ideas, and we want to have about 8 to 15 of them, or in that range. You don't want to have too few, and you don't want to have too many. The tricky part is that we want each outcome to be large enough that we're going to cover it over an extended period of time. It's not going to be a one and done sort of lesson. It's something that's really important to the course and something that we're going to be doing often. It also can't be too big because we want to be specific about what the student knows. So if it was all encompassing, that's too hard to be able to differentiate what a student knows within that outcome. So I want to be able to be specific. So a couple of examples there. Volume. That's a big idea, right? The idea of being able to calculate the volume of something or the surface area of something, that's a big idea. Um, Something like calculating the angles inside a triangle. That's not really a big idea, right? That's very, very specific, and it's something we probably teach quickly and move on. So that's the idea. Now, this next slide, this is a glimpse at some of the outcomes that were chosen for the 1P course. And these were selected a few years ago. And this has very much been a work in progress. These outcomes have changed multiple times, and they would continue to change if that course was still continuing, I'm sure. And in fact, you can't quite see it there, but there's actually 16 outcomes listed here. So 16 big ideas from this grade 9 applied course. And you can take a quick scan of that. I think most of them make sense. These are big ideas that we think are important, that we really want our students to know by the time they finish. So from a marked book standpoint, what you would see is 16 entries, right? Entry 1 would say optimization of area and perimeter. Entry 2 would say Pythagorean theorem, and so on. 16 entries, the number of entries would never change, but we would update depending on what the student has shown us that they know. We're going to focus a little bit more on solving equations, that outcome number 10, in the next video. But here's the next big part, is how are we going to actually record the progress? So again, traditionally, if we'd given a test, we would have we'd have our Kika breakdown, I suppose, but we'd have a mark that we'd convert to a percentage. But whatever, it would get recorded in MarkBook as 17 out of 20 or 13 out of 23, whatever it was. It would be some fraction of a mark out of a total mark. We're trying to flip that around a little bit because we want this to be about learning and how well the students are understanding things, not so much about point gaining, right? We don't want them thinking about it as how can I get my mark higher? We want them thinking about how can I understand things better? So we're trying to change the focus around that a little bit. And by one of the ways we can do that is we can grade them in levels. And the idea with this is to say, again, this is in a particular outcome, right? In a particular outcome, let's say solving equations, because we're going to talk about that next. In a particular outcome like solving equations, what would it mean to say that a student is 82 compared to a student that gets 84? That differentiation between an 82 and an 84 isn't describable, right? We can't really describe what the difference is other than to say, well, I did a whole bunch of assessments and the percentage in the end came out to 82 and 84. What we're trying to do here is break the student's level of understanding down into levels, very much like rubrics like we've seen before. And we have to think about what each of those levels would look like. So this is the level breakdown that I'm recommending, and it's worked well from the teachers that have tried it so far. We have 7 different levels. And you'll notice that I've got the levels listed. We've got a description and points, which basically is the percentage that we have to assign. Keep in mind, at the end of the day, we still need to create a report card. We still need to give the students a percent. So that still needs to happen at the end. This is just hopefully a better way of getting at that. So every time we're assessing a student, they can only ever achieve one of these 7 levels of achievement within each outcome. So ideally, we're getting towards the top. But for example, an average student might have a level 3 in a particular outcome. So they would have that 75 written in their mark book in that particular outcome. And then what we'd be waiting to see is later on, can they demonstrate that they actually understood things a little bit better, right? We can change things as they learn more. That's very helpful in a lot of ways, which we're going to talk about as we go forward. Another little point there, it says each outcome will be equally weighted. So the idea when we were trying to come up with all of these outcomes, we want all of those outcomes to be weighted equally, which is a little bit tricky when it comes to deciding what those outcomes are. That's a fairly big job, and why it's been so flexible over the past few years as we're making changes to it, trying to decide exactly how we like that breakdown to look like. I'm going to wrap up this video with this. These are the reasons that we're making this decision to try and use outcome-based assessment with this new grade 9 course. We're going to be dealing with a lot of variety in the students that are coming into the course. It's going to be something that's very different for us to adjust to. And these are some of the things that are going to be helpful in terms of understanding what the students know, having relationships with those students and with parents and communicating what the students know. And even by the end of the course, trying to make recommendations again for what the students should be interested in the grade 10 course. These are things we're going to talk about again a little bit more in the part 2 video, but keep this in mind. These are some of our big things that this will help us with. Because we're now breaking things down into outcomes, each mark will be specific to an outcome. So I can talk to students and say, hey, you're really strong here, but you're still struggling here. We can be really specific about what students know and where they're still struggling. Second bullet, all of our course expectations start off with by the end of the course, students will. This method allows for fairly easy adjustments as students figure things out later on in the course where they might not have known it on the first quiz, right? So as long as they've learned it eventually, we can easily make adjustments to fit that. Late and missing assignments are a tough one. Of course, we don't want students to be handing in things late. We don't want them missing assignments. But from an outcome-based assessment perspective, from an assessment perspective in general, my job is to inform on what the students know. And if students haven't handed something in, that's just a missing piece of information. It's like a missing opportunity. The students haven't had that opportunity to show me what they know. But that doesn't mean they don't know it. And so putting in zeros for missing assignments and late penalties can cause some real discrepancies in final marks. This can fix that problem because I don't have to put a zero in if something isn't handed in. It's just a missed opportunity. If students can do something later to convince me that they really understand this particular outcome, I can add that in and it doesn't affect them in the same way. So nice advantage there. Triangulation of data has been a stumbling point for quite a long time, really. This idea of trying to balance our products, our observations, and our conversations. And we see the triangle and we imagine that it has to be one third, one third, one third. And of course, that's not the case. The idea with triangulation is that we're trying to take in all of the information that we have and to make a professional judgment about what the students know. Well, we're going to do that within each outcome. So again, think about that particular one, solving equations. Well, maybe we had a student that didn't do so well in the test, but we've seen them in class do really well with solving equations. We know that they can. The idea is that we're taking in all of the information that we have and then assigning a level to them. So we're balancing what we know about what the student's done in class, what they've done on paper, and putting it all together and saying, "Hey, I'm a professional teacher. I'm willing to say that this student is actually a level 3 in this particular outcome, or this student is actually a level 4, level 2, whatever." But that's up to us to make that decision based on all of the different information that we're able to gather. And the bonus, this isn't part of the big four, but this is a bonus that I kind of like. Kika gets wrapped in to all of these outcomes now. So we don't need to break down every little assessment into this is a knowledge question, this is an application question. Now we can really have this all-encompassing assessment method where Kika just fits into everything. We can't ignore it. I'm not saying we can never have a communication question again. Of course we have to, but it makes way more sense to balance them and see how they fit together rather than pulling them all apart and reporting on them all separately. We can do that moving into outcome-based assessment. Thanks for watching the first video. I hope that helps get a bit of an introduction to what's happening. And stay tuned. We're going to move into part 2, which is going to look a little bit more into what some of our assessments might look like and how we can decide on levels.